Hey folks, here's the promised video of my thoughts, feelings, etc. on the new George Harrison remix crazy box set of All Things Must Pass. I purchased a couple of different versions of it. So the biggest one is the 8 LP version, which has the original or the repress of the original with the remix version, obviously, and then the extra box, which has the demos and some extra jams and alternate takes and all that stuff, with a very nice book, of course. And you know, so what do we do? Where to begin? This is an album I've bought a number of times. I'm looking at one there, one there. I've got my original version. I've got cassette version, or had a cassette version. I've had 1, 2, 3, I think 4 CD versions of varying types. So, do the math of how many that is at this point. Now, as well, what I did also buy is I was originally going to buy the 5-disc Blu-ray set. I still might down the road, but my wallet has taken a beating lately, so obviously. What I did end up buying, because it's close. It's the same sort of file size as what would have been on the Blu-ray from the website HD Tracks, which basically had the entire either 8 LP version or of with the demos and the outtakes and all that kind of stuff. I didn't buy that aspect of the new remix record because I don't necessarily need to hear an outtake remix. It was just going to cost me a little more money. So, I have those on there on the album, obviously. I also had the Amazon MP3s because, again, I'm trying to kind of get a sense of like how things sound in as many different formats as possible. So, again, long story short, going back, it's one of those albums that I've loved, but has also maddened me a little bit because of the original mix of it with Phil Spector's kind of mud all over some of it, and I always wanted to hear just clarity. I don't mind reverb, but when you're not really crafting or sculpting the reverb with the instruments or the vocals or the arrangements and all that kind of stuff in a nice and sort of pleasing way, like I think Brian Wilson, he was able to hone that stuff. He made the reverb another character instead of like the main event, you know what I mean? And that's what I kind of feel like with that original mix, which, again, I don't begrudge anybody loving that original mix. I mean, I still love the album, don't get me wrong. There's actually a few, and you'll hear my thoughts about each song. There's a couple of the songs that, truthfully, I think the original mixes are still better. We'll get into that. But all in all, again, it's just as a somewhat of an audiophile. I'm an engineer. I say this all the time. But, audio engineer, live engineer, producer, album producer, all that kind of stuff. So I have a very specific idea of what I want to hear. So for me, it's like the penultimate pop album is still the Beatles' Revolver. I think there's something about the sound of that record, and there's the sharpness, and it's just really. I don't know. There's just something about that record that I truly, truly love, and I would hope maybe down the road they're going to do a remix of that if they're able to. But anyway, that and like the White Album and just that whole era of Beatles, of course, and then the general, the Dark Side of the Moons and the Pink Floyd records and all the really, really great sounding records. And all Things Must Pass. I couldn't really put it. I just couldn't put it in that same category of a great sounding record. It had a character and it sounded interesting and it was what it was. But it was also sort of like Jethro Tull's Aqualung album. Same thing, right? Great album, amazing record. Obviously seminal to them, whatever. The sound of that record has always been shite. The original mix of it has always been shite, and the long history, this can all be found on the internet. At the time, there were. In Morgan Studios, and the studio was still being built. There were still problems. They were recording throughout all of this, and you can hear those problems. The mix is the same thing. It's muddy. It's kind of dark. It's indistinct. Now, it adds certainly to the character of that original mix, of that original album. Which I think that there's something, it works for those songs in that particular album. But again, it's not something that was sort of purposefully done like it was with All Things Must Pass. I mean, they just kind of, we're going to put a ton of reverb on stuff. We're going to slather it here, there, and everywhere, and just I don't know. It felt so sort of that aspect of the sound always felt slapdash and really sloppy to me. And it was just kind of a shame. Anyway, long story short, all this time I've always wanted to hear a nice remix where, not fully dry, but just controlled. Like the reverbs are you can hear the reverb, but you can also hear the instruments and the voices and the arrangements and how all those things are supposed to work together. And you get a glimpse of them in the original mix, but it's also, like I said, they didn't capture like what Brian Wilson was able to do, where he could take an accordion and a clarinet and then like a jangle piano and put tons of reverb on the jangle piano and mix all three of those things together to create this otherworldly thing. That's different, because he was crafting that shit. Just was not the same, in my opinion now. So just not the same thing for All Things Must Pass. Anyway. So here we are, many remasters later, and now into the remix, which I've been waiting for a long time. Now, I've also been seeing other people's takes on this, and it ranges from best thing ever to worst thing ever. Think of it as I've heard the same thing with many other remixed records. Steven Wilson, he gets picked on a lot because he's done many remixes. He's done a couple of the ELP records. He's done pretty much all the Gentle Giants that are able to be done. Same thing with XTC. Yes. Jethro Tull specifically has done almost into the entire catalog at this point. Among King Crimson, ad nauseum, whatever. I find them as an engineer fascinating, if not necessarily, creating the new definitive record, right? Like I'm probably more than likely, there are certain albums that I will still go to the original mix just because it's also what I grew up with, and there are certain other things you remember that maybe aren't on the remix, whatever it might be. Now, bringing up the Aqualung record, right? He, as in my opinion, created the definitive version of it by doing a remix and really nailing each instrument, each track, EQing without over compressing. I think it brings out the arrangements better. It brings out the sound of the band. You can hear things you didn't hear before. There was, especially like the acoustic guitar playing. It's just for me a better experience than the original mix. So I probably tend toward that if I'm going to listen to it. Also, the fact that he remixed all of the bits and pieces that happened around that same time period. Good to have in one spot. Anyway, we're not talking about Yes and Jethro Tull. We're talking about the new George Harrison, and it would have been an interesting experiment. Probably still would be, if Steven Wilson were to get his hands on this stuff. So, one of the things I haven't seen yet in like some of the more upscale things like Sound on Sound, who have like in the past done stories on when Sgt. Pepper was remixed a few years back by Giles Martin. How they did it technologically, like by finding the various generations of multi-tracks before they were bouncing in 4-track mode, so that way he digitized those things and then just resynced them later to then make a full-on, say, 12 to 16 channel track new remaster with those those stems all separated. Also then with the Beatles live at Shea, where they did some real technological stuff and were literally extracting from the 3-track tape tracks that had various instruments all on the same track, being able to isolate them technologically, create a new stem of them, and then do a full-on remix of that stuff. Sounds amazing, right? So I want to know, okay, well, how did they handle this technologically, or did they just go with whatever final multi-tracks that they had? Did they, because they're, in the history, they started at Abbey Road doing, a certain amount of tracks, but then they moved on to, I believe it was Olympic or Trident. I forget which one now. And they, then they started doing, bouncing and overdubbing from there and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'd like to hear more about that process if there is indeed something to hear. Paul Hicks and Donnie Harrison obviously were the head, the producers on this record. So, all in all I'm going to say is this. I'm not going to be in either camp of either I hate it or I love it. As is. Again, more on this to come. All I'm going to say is that, yes, there, I think, was a missed opportunity on some levels of this. Hard to know where that ball was dropped, but that said, there, in general, what was done, what was being told that was going to be getting done, got done. Okay, I'm being cryptic now. All right. So first things first, obviously, the first thing that I did was this, mainly because I had it in my car. I had it. This was before this arrived. It was up on Amazon first, so I was able to play all of the MP3s of the whole new remixed record, and just to listen to it and get a sense of it and all. I mean, it's fucking MP3s. They suck. I mean, I wouldn't, even just in my car, I don't listen to MP3s if I can help it. It's just awful. It's awful sounding files. It's gobbledygook. Don't bother, Unless you're the one who likes music in the background like that, that's fine. Then do what you want. It is what it is. But if you're an audiophile, just don't. Just don't. Anyway, so that's the MP3s out of the way. So again, from there, what I did is I went to HD Tracks, and what I did is I bought the version that was just the remix of just the original 3-record set. So as not to break my bank, right? But that and those tracks, I downloaded them in 196.24 WAV file, right? So as a producer, I tend to use WAV files, obviously, when I'm doing, I actually only do 96.24 when I'm recording, because that's generally the industry standard. I don't do surround mixes, it's not something that any of the people that I've produced needed. So not in my bailiwick to go that high, and I do still, I don't have banks of servers, so I still have to be careful of like how much, room I'm taking up. So anyway, so I normally work in 96.24. So I bought the highest end of those that I could, and I figured it would be a good enough way to, listen to it on different areas and different speakers, along with the vinyl, of course, So the first thing that I did, and just to let you know of like what I listened to it on, so I have some AKG headphones. My office space here has just got some bookshelf speakers. Nothing. I don't have a huge audiophile system as far as when I'm listening. And then I listen to them on my studio KRK 5s from my computer. Now I also listen to them in my car. I listen to a lot of music in my car, as I think most people do. And to me, I wanted to have some semblance of, I'm not going horribly high-end audiophile. It's just because the majority of folks don't have those systems, And I think that there's an irony here about that. I think that part of the problem with some of the folks that maybe have higher-end systems like that, those systems are tweaked. I mean, you're talking, there's potentially extra bass, there's EQ curves happening, there's, if you have a graphic EQ or whatever it might be, you might have the bass pumped or whatever, that's, I'm willing to bet that any audiophile, or so, not any, but many audiophiles don't listen to their stuff flat. Flat bass, flat middle, flat treble. To get a real idea of what it is that you just bought, right? So I would be wondering for the folks, some of the folks that really don't like it at all, that think it's like a very specific kind of sound that they screwed it up. I'm going to sort of half agree with you, but I would want to ask the question: have you tried listening to it with your system not in full tweak mode, right? You know, try listening to it again, flatten everything out in your room, just flatten it out. And I know it might be difficult, but that because your ear gets used to a certain way of listening to things, and I get that. I have always listened to everything as flat as I possibly can. Again, as a producer and engineer, I need to do that. I need to know how much high end or bass or whatever that I'm doing a mix or a master, and I need to know how that's going to translate on various speakers. Obviously, I need to know I'm not over tweaking the high end or underselling the bass or whatever it might be. And if I'm listening to that stuff on a tweaked system where the bass is enhanced or whatever it might be, I'm going to mix differently. Potentially screw it up, as what it comes down to. Anyway, so that would be my first suggestion to anybody who has the record either in vinyl or the CDs or whatever. Now, one of the things I have heard is that the CDs sound very compressed. Not surprised. CDs are, as much as I still buy CDs and I think that there's a place for them, I think mastering to CDs has become a bit of a, as normal. It's a bit of a compression game, which is a shame. So that's missing from my critiques of all this stuff. Now, to let you know, all my A/B comparison was from the 2000 and was it 2001, 2000? It was the year before Harrison passed away. That year's remaster. That's the one that I think of the original album sounds the best of, like, what saying. It wasn't a remix, it was just a remaster, but that's the one that to my ears sounds the best of any of the versions that I've heard above the original, right? So my A/B comparison is from that remaster from 2001 and then the new remix now in 2021. So I took notes, and here we go. I'm going to go pretty much song by song, and I think so. In starting, because I don't have this stuff, I'm old. My memory's fading. As I had mentioned, like I said, I looked at the various things I was trying to get a sense of in listening to this record over and over again. I think that in general, the first thing I'm going to say, which you can take with a grain of salt or whatever as you listen to what I'm saying about each track, I think that and again, please remember that the definition of remix versus remaster, they're two different things. And I know I see people going back, like they keep saying remaster. This is a remix. 20 years ago was a remaster. Okay, you have to understand the difference, and people keep messing that up, I think. Anyway, I think the remix of the tracks by Danny Harrison and Paul Hicks is there. So it's different. It's definitely less reverberated. I can hear arrangement. I can hear more of like the interplay between instruments and violins and brass and vocals, especially the background vocals. To me, that's almost the biggest revelation in my opinion. Is the background vocals and the interplay between those and like the horns and the violins, the arrangements. As I think I had mentioned before, where the missed opportunity happens is in the remaster or the mastering of these various issues of the remix. What do I mean by that? So one of the things that I had noticed people were saying is that it sounded dull, or that it was very bass heavy, or that it just like there was no sparkle, and I had already started, and mistake or not, I had already started my process of listening to the A/B comparisons and all that kind of stuff. My first listen was on headphones. Was on my AKG headphones. 240s, by the way. And you know, it's amazing when I think about it. It's like, all things must pass. I've never. I think I've only listened to it on headphones like a few times. Truthfully, I always tend to listen to it on speakers or in the car or whatever. So that I think was a part of the revelatory part for me, especially with the remix. So I did notice that, yeah, the bass, floor is definitely up there, and that it was still kind of mixed or mastered conservatively, I think. However, in these headphones, I was able to enjoy it, and I could hear things that I always wanted to hear. You know, to me, again, the revelatory thing about this remix is hearing Harrison. Now, you can remember Harrison did pretty much all of the voices on this thing, all of the background voices. There was a lot of tape manipulation, slowing down and speeding up to get higher notes that he couldn't naturally hit, or lower notes for that matter. So you hear this, what sounds like a choir, but that's all him. That's the George O'Hara singers. And it's just talk about that part alone is just and he never thought of himself as a great singer. In my mind, I'm thinking, dude, are you kidding me? It's like he was definitely that glue in the Beatles 3 part there that people kind of miss. And when you hear him on his own and then harmonizing on his own, you hear that his voice in those chordal kind of patterns is very much like a brass section. Which brings me to my next point, is that on certain of the tracks that have a very pronounced brass section above, like like a string section, that are interplaying with the background vocals, how interesting the arrangements of that interplay is. And I'll go again song by song about each of those things. But anyway, that's my overall kind of thought about this. And as far as the mastering goes, I'll talk further later down the road about what I did. Okay. So starting with "I'd Have You Anytime," obviously, again, you hear the low end rise on the remix is like pretty big, which I can think that might be the first thing that people hear, and it's jarring. Okay. And the voices are up front, and this is for the whole record. His voice, some of the echo was pulled off, and then his voice was stepped up a bit. So you hear more of a little bit of a rasp in his throat. You hear him, struggling with a few notes. There's a cracked voice here and there. Even in "My Sweet Lord," there's a very audible voice crack that they just left in. But it's real. It's very vulnerable. It's very. It's not like, oh, that's a wrong note, or why didn't they fix that? It's more like, oh wow, that's George just really belting his heart out, and this whole record is like that. Especially hearing the vocals that way. So so with the new remix on the voices, there's really not a lot of echo. It's really up front. It's definitely a mellower sound. It's a somewhat cleaner low end for sure. It's like not muddy. Again, this is the mud part is like not literally distorting. Let's see. So generally less reverb on everything. The stereo imaging is a little bit less hard left, hard right with some of the instruments than the original. And I had to admit I was missing a little bit of reverb on one of the acoustic rhythm guitars. The one specifically where he comes out of the bridge. I'll have you anytime, and then there's a little pause, and the acoustic guitar just kind of does a little sus chord, but jing jing, and then there's a pause, and then they go back into the verse. The original version of there was like the echo on that particular instrument was nice, that it kind of that was brought down a little bit. It's one of those things that like you expect and it wasn't there, and it's sort of like okay. That's one thing I suppose I could mix or miss. I also have really bad handwriting, so some of these notes I'm looking at, I'm going, what the fuck did I write there? Yeah, noticing that there was some high-end fixing. It seemed like I could kind of hear a little bit of compression on some of the high-end bits, but again, not a lot. My Sweet Lord. So the differences being from the original to the remix, and one of the things I noticed was that the harmonium that comes in out of the first verse on the original version has a lot of reverb on it, so you just kind of hear it as a bit of a wash. It's not unpleasant, The lead vocals were always a bit behind the background vocals and almost a little bit overwhelmed. In general, there's like a lot of reverb on all of the guitars. The auto harp kind of all but gets lost in the shuffle. And the strings blend in with the harmonium, so it's kind of a big cacophonous mess. The epitome of all things must pass is My Sweet Lord. Now, in the remix, the things that I did notice was that the acoustic guitars, the big phalanx of 5 or 6 acoustic guitars played at once, definitely noticed that it was a bit muted, and not as much presence. In other words, I had listened around and I kind of agreed with some folks that like it wasn't as big or whatever. Lead vocals up front, like I said, but they're a little more on par with the backing vocals, so you can hear a little bit more of what he's trying to do. Now, things like the harmonium and the auto harp, both of those are much better defined in the remix, and I enjoy that, especially the harmonium. It's like the harmonium's doing some nice chordal structures in there that you can actually hear now. It's like, oh, that's cool. So that's what they were hearing in the studio, and then in the remix, like, you never heard it again. The auto harp, you can hear a nice tinkle on the top there. High end, I'll say. The lead vocals and the backing vocals, they really brought the reverb down a lot on those. The strings are a lot more defined, which kind of brings out the arrangement nice. The same thing. I'm hearing other bits of the arrangement of the strings that I'd never heard before, really. And what's interesting is that there's also 2 very distinct tambourine sounds on My Sweet Lord, which I never really noticed before. And those are the kinds of things in remixes I really like to hear. So I never heard that before. That's cool. So, and then again, it's been sitting in 50 years. That's been on the tape. No one's heard it, or no one remembers hearing it. Right? Okay. Wawa. So this is one of those. In general, it's the bigger sounding songs or the most rock songs that I hated the most. As far as the original remixes, it's like Wawa. It's such a shame because it's such a great riff. It's such a great song, and just the performance of it is really bombastic and angry and emotional. And to me, the reverb just I don't know. And maybe some people would say, oh well, it was part of it. It sounds like he's drowning a little bit, or it sounds like it's like so sure, okay. However, in my mind, I just felt it was just too much. It just screwed the definition of all the guitars. You can kind of hear the reverb regurgitating on itself. Like, when you get into that weird, and you got to remember whatever, echo or reverb they were using, it was a room. I mean, they didn't have digital echo in those days. So you're talking either the Abbey Road Spring, reverb rooms or whatever it might be. And, so there was it's too much. I just say it's basically a soupy mess. It's a wall of mud. I mean, it always has been in my head, and it's always been a shame because I really like the song. Now, the remix is interesting because, so the first thing clear, like the percussion track alone, you can hear the elements of the percussion track instead of it just being a big soupy mess. You can definitely hear that there's printed reverb on aspects of it, so that clearly things they couldn't get rid of. And we knew that was going to be the case, but the guitars are cleaned up without losing their there's enough reverb on there to make them. But I can hear them now. I can hear them working in tandem with each other. In the riff, I can hear there's a Rhodes piano in there that's just kind of driving it really nicely. The drums have tone in them. The lead vocals, backing vocals are again more up front. The horns are more defined. You can hear the arrangements better. The chart, like especially like on this one, what was interesting is that the chart dynamics, especially on that song, toward the end as well. There's like these brass. They're swelling. It's like that final fade out. The long tones that the brass is playing. There's actual like dynamics that were written into those arrangements where they're in a pianissimo and they go wah, wah, and they keep doing that as a wah, right? remember hearing that ever in the original one. If it's there, I mean, in doing the A and B and going back, and then I can kind of go, oh, I kind of sort of hear it now, but that might be just me fooling myself. The remix really brings it out, and I enjoy that. And again, it's part of the arrangement. Why would they want to lose that? Like toward that, especially in this one, there's a lot of like during the solo section. There's like multiple slide guitars going on, both acoustic and electric, with the brass playing like and there's the interplay between all of that. I can hear all the pieces now. And I don't know about you, but I never remembered there being a motorcycle sound at the end of this song. I went back to the remaster back from 20 years ago. Sure enough, it's there. I mean, I heard it in the headphones. I don't know, maybe it was just because I've always listened to it either in the car, thinking maybe it was just an actual motorcycle. But no, there's a motorcycle right at the very end of the song, which is really funny. And then we're gonna get into "Isn't It a Pity?" So interesting is that I don't think I remember or knew that this was a song back from 1966. Actually, that got whatever denied or whatever. So I had a note in here that says that this is one of the songs benefiting from the reverb. I think because for some reason the song, I don't know, for whatever reason, it works okay in the original mix, or the reverb is a little more tamed and just the right amount so that it's not overdone. I think the other thing in hearing the remix, to me, that the song, I mean, we kind of already knew this, but it was very, very clearly directed at his bandmates, if not specifically Paul, right? And it sounds like a Hey Jude parody, especially at the end where you're hearing na 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 na. Isn't it a pity? I mean, it's. Some people have said, oh, that's him that's sort of a love letter to the Beatles. It's like, I don't think so. Not at that point. What he was writing about and when this came out, that was more like a. Listen, I'm gonna do a long fade out too, motherfucker. And some people say, "Oh, the song is too long. The song's too long." Well, so was Hey Jude. It's the same thing. I mean, he clearly took the template on purpose. There's a little bit of passive aggressive energy going on there. I think. The fact that this comes from like 1966. Got to remember that even at that time, there's the first time that. McCartney didn't play on a Beatles tune was She Said when they were recording in 1966, and they had some sort of row. He went home, George Harrison played the bass. There's only 3 Beatles on that song, and I never knew that until very recently, So one has to wonder if this is a song that kind of came out of that whole thing. Isn't it a pity, isn't it a shame, how we take each other's love and cause each other pain? It's like, did one thing lead to another in that regard? Was that incident with She Said that, in this mold? The fact that it sounds very much like I Am the Walrus as far as the lope of it goes, that can't be an accident either, So, again, the remix, the definition of everything is just so much more pleasing to my ear. The strings soar, but there seems, again, better dynamics within the arrangements. I think on this song specifically, the lead vocals up front are kind of heartbreaking to me. Hearing Harrison kind of just, really sad, just really, really kind of deeply sad, and, the slide guitar pedal steel conversations that are happening between lyrical pauses. So, what came to my mind, which had never come to my mind before, was, again, the other famous incident with Harrison and Paul McCartney about when they were first recording Hey Jude. I think hence the addition of the Hey Jude lyric at the end was the famous incident where, they were rehearsing, they were working the song, they were workshopping it, whatever, and Harrison was doing some sort of guitar part after, it was like, Hey Jude, da 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 da, don't make it bad, da 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 da. And McCartney basically said, hey, don't do that. And apparently Harrison said, all right, fuck it, I won't play at all. All right. And if you think about slide guitar and pedal steel guitar in the country realm and the country genre, it's meant to be somewhat, it adorns the lyrics, but it's meant to be kind of conversational. If you listen to a lot of country stuff, it's like that instrument and that sound is coming right in between those vocal pauses. You listen to a lot of country music, it's exactly what's going on there. Now, whether he realized that's what was happening or not, again, there has to be a certain amount of accident there a little bit, but it's also his work in Indian music and stuff like that. It's all very his guitar style is very conversational to my mind. Which again, to me, this whole song is just a big kind of like, this is what I lived with for this long, and this is the unfortunate thing that happened. One thing I forgot to mention about Wawa with the new remix is that to me, there are aspects of it because there's so much on it, there's so much in the arrangement, and it's got such a manic kind of sound. It reminded me of the Monkees' Star Collector. Listen to Star Collector and then listen to Wawa. I don't know, it just popped into my head as like, oh, it's a little, just the vibe of it is very, very similar. Anyway, so that's side one. Then we're on to side two. So what is life? Same thing, always kind of hated the reverb on this, too thick, just, the drums are all, like, they're right there in your face, they're all right in front of everything. It's like, why? Why would you mix that? Like the thumpy, over compressed, just no dynamics, just it's like one of the ones from the original album I've always hated. Even though, again, I love the song, the remix, thank God, there's more air, there's clarity, the drums are in their proper place. There's certain slide guitar moments that were mixed out of the original mix that are now there, which is nice. So, on that note, this is I feel like I don't want to go through this entire thing before people lose interest or whatever about what happened or how I'm listening to this. So, as an engineer, I downloaded those WAV files and listening to them as I did. I then put on my audio engineer hat, of course, brought it into my what I would normally bring in a final mix, if you will, into the end result of my mastering or whatever, before I set it to potentially a CD manufacturer. And I've got a very simple setup with my Mac. I just brought it into this thing called Sound Studio. It's a very simple editor. It's got very simple filters, but I like it. It works very, very quickly and simply. I brought it into that, kind of got a sense of the waveform. And I might even be able to, I'll put some pictures up of those so you can kind of see it. And clearly there was like that high mid, high end that I think is what people are talking about was what was missing from this remix. So it's like, all right, let me tinker a little bit. But I didn't want to do too much, obviously. I didn't want to just go nuts because that's, again, kind of antithetical beside the point. I didn't want to have to do too much, So, but what I did is I did bring up the high mid and kind of did a high shelf just to clear up that aspect of the spectrum so that so it created air and it created sparkle, but not too much so that it was, it's a little more, it was just enough to get, evenly matched with the new bass response, the new bass frequencies. And if you want to fuck around with it, pardon my French, obviously I can't play these things up here because I'll get in trouble. Anybody that has an audiophile sort of mindset might want to go about and do something like this. But again, if you're going to do it conservatively. This is where I wanted to be conservative. The frequencies that I grabbed in my little AU filter was at frequency 2481 hertz. The width was 2.72 octave with a gain of about 4.6 dB. And then my high shelf was frequency 5655 hertz, my gain being 5.83 dB. And that's all. That's it. That's all I did. And for me, that's all I needed. I just needed that little extra curve on the high mid and the high shelf, and it evened it all out. So your the new bass response is still there, but now the high end is matching it, note for note, but without being overbearing or tinny or icy or anything like that. It's just enough to create that air that I've always wanted to hear on these mixes. and just the sparkle. I was able to, restore the sparkle of the top end thing instruments like the acoustic guitars, the auto harps, the brass, the vocals, but without them sounding shrill. And I basically put that exact same these exact parameters on every single track. And for me, this is what I've been listening to. I've been listening to it in my car, in my headphones, on these various speakers that I have. And it's always the way that I've wanted to hear it. So I'm backtracking once again. I think the remix is there. The mastering of the remix is not. Even with the LP set. The pressing is okay. I don't have, again, my system isn't, if those with a more high-end system can look at those frequencies, tweak as you will, start flat, or bring up some high-end, and you'll restore a little bit of what you're missing. So, like, I guess what it comes down to is my thing is just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Think about it for a second. You have options. If you've got a sound system, you have options for EQ that you can tweak to your heart's content however you like. And if you've got a newer system, you can program it, So, anyway, that's a digression. Not a digression, it's more of like a, hey, by the way, just so you're aware, this is what I'm talking about. About when I'm talking about the new remix and the clarity and the thing. This is after adding my little bit of sparkly dust. Like I said, it works for me. So, I would say, though, if you're going to do that, definitely obviously don't do them with the MP3s. I would also say, if you're going to rip your CDs and try and do it with those, 44, 16-bit compressed audio files from CD, I wouldn't do it with those either. If you're going to do it, go to HD Tracks, download the highest end waves you can, because those are... they're very uncompressed. There's a lot of headroom. There's a lot of dynamics in those mixes. If you add that thing, the dynamics remain. It'll bring your wave form up a bit, but it didn't distort. It wasn't pushing anything. It worked. So anyway, I digress. So we're still on side 2. If Not For You. One of the softer songs that, like some of the other softer songs on the original album, the original mix, always sort of, it was those songs that sort of benefited the most from the reverb, or, for obvious reasons, because they were a little softer, so it's not hitting those reverb plates as hard and as loud, but just enough to be really, to create that ethereal thing that we always loved about this record, So for things like If Not For You, which, as one of the songs on the record, it's one of the minor songs, to be honest. No diss to Bob Dylan, but, it just kind of is, Anyway, the original mix, one of the things that I always hated about it was like that ridiculous, on the bridge, and it was one of those things I've always hated about a lot of, like, to be honest, like some of the girl group things that Spectre did, just a big tambourine sound that rides over fucking everything for no other reason than because you could. That's what it sounds like. And I've always, again, thankfully it only comes up in the bridges of the song, and it's not going through the whole thing, because that would have just destroyed it completely. Still the most annoying thing. Anyway, so the remix, in a little bit, perhaps, maybe suffers a bit from the fact that the vocals has practically no reverb on it at all at this point. That's again, taste thing. Unfortunately, the tambourine on the bridge is still fucking loud and annoying, and clearly that was printed that way, and maybe they couldn't do... I don't know. Maybe it was printed on one of the drum tracks, and they really couldn't do anything to fix it. So it kind of is what it is, Now, though, with the remix, the instrumental interplay of the organ, the piano, the slide guitars, the harmonica is so much better balanced now, and I can hear everything working together, working alongside each other, or against each other for that matter, depending on what's going on. But it's just like it's this wonderful little group of instruments all working together as one piece in that moment, in that instrumental moment. So Yeah, like I said, it was never as big a problem in the original mix because it's such a bit of a softer song. But now, so Behind That Locked Door is another one of those songs, same as If Not For You, because it was a, more of a softer ballady kind of thing. And, the reverb on that song specifically is also, starting with that pedal steel guitar, I mean, it just makes for such a beautiful, ethereal, heartbreaking, sad thing. In the original mix, I think the reverb works to its advantage in that regard. The horn, the organ, the Hammond organ spin, which is very much like mimicking that roller rink style of Garth Hudson. I've always been at odds with that whole kind of swirly Hammond organ sound. I like more of an ethereal church type of sound. You could clearly see that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to mimic Garth Hudson's style, and it is what it is. So, that's just a personal, whatever, vendetta. So the remix again is much the same as If Not For You. They could have left more. The reverb on it would have been fine. The lead vocal is very naked and emotional, and it actually brings out the inflections of how he was singing it, which were it's actually very affecting without all the reverb. You can really sense that he is, there's just something really heartfelt about this. Now, I have a story about this particular song, so I'm listening to it in my car, and this would have been the MP3s, I think, at the time. I was just listening in my car, and and this song comes on. And at some point in the song, I'm stuck somewhere in a parking lot in traffic or whatever, in a line of cars. And as this song is playing, I'm just kind of sitting there, and suddenly a dragonfly he's flying around, and suddenly he just like lights in front of me, in front of my windshield, and just looks at me for long enough to be like, oh shit, that's a dragonfly looking at me, and then it flies away. Whew. Tell you what, with the remix and George's voice and just the ethereal nature of that song and the heartbreak of that song and that moment with the dragonfly, and needless to say, there are things going on in my life that would make a poetic moment like that be really, really deep and rich for me. So I'm gonna chalk that one up to George, and thanks, George. I appreciated that particular little high sign or something, because it was a very meaningful moment. If I'm making more of it, well, you can do that, can't you? So anyway, that's my story about Behind That Locked Door. So that was always one of my favorites anyway from this record. Some of those slower songs. So on to Let It Down. So once again, another one from the original mix that I always hated because it was just like too much reverb, just a bad mix in my opinion of everything that's going on. And there's so much going on in that song that just should be heard, and you never heard it. So now the remix, the drums are clear, even though you can tell the echo was printed on the drum tracks. They're clearer and a little more controlled, so they're not up front and crazy. But they're clarified, and the mix, it's appropriate to the mix with the band. It's not just right here or here, It's like it's there where it should be. There's horns, there's shaker, the strings are defined. There's a shaker that in my head I never heard really before. That brings out the sort of really sexy vibe of this song, which is clearly about sex that George loved so much. This remix of it with the brass and the sort of howling vocals and the passion that's happening there is so much a better experience now without all that fucking mud. It's so much better. It's so much better. Then into Run of the Mill. Same thing, from the original mix. Same heavy. So on the initial acoustic guitar, in the original mix, there was a heavy dose of ADT on those acoustic guitars, which is some tape manipulation. Sounds almost a little psychedelic, but it's a little tipsy. It's a little sort of like not controlled or whatever. in this new remix, they clearly did the same type of effect, but they controlled it. You know, they clearly it's not something that was printed on tape. It was something that was happening either in the mix that they had to add later. So they just redid it, and it's a little more controlled. You know, it's a little less sort of like not sure what's going on. Again, the original drums overwhelm it. It's overcompressed. It sounds like shit, in my opinion. Now the remix, as I mentioned, the ADT and the guitars cleaned up nicely. Drums are in their place, a lot more transparent, but they're still there. You know. So there's clearly George was playing guitar and doing sort of like a demo voice as he was playing the guitar, which you now can hear now that the reverb has been taken away. You can kind of hear it just behind his main lead vocal, so it sounds a little bit like slight double vocal or whatever. And it's not perfectly in sync with each other, but it just adds a nice another little bit of character that you didn't hear before. I think the only thing about this song, and this would go for both either the original mix or the new remix, is that there's like some strings that happen that sound literally just like at the very very end of the song, that kind of in the fade out, that you can tell it's there in the song, but it's really really low and really really subtle. But then they come out when you hear the fade. I guess in my head I would have liked to have heard a little more of those strings. Minor quibble, very minor quibble. So technically that would be all of the first album of All Things Must Pass. Now, on the remaster from 2001, excuse me, before George Harrison passed away. So there was a bunch of extras. Now this was the version that had the altered, sort of modernized, intrusional kind of photographs of George in his field with the buildings and all that kind of stuff. And it was, you know, clearly George just saying, well, listen, it's my record, I can do what the fuck I want with it. So, you know, but he had put in a bunch of extras on the record. You know, he put, I think, a couple of demos. He had you know, stuff like that. He had the new version of My Sweet Lord, which was, you know, you listen to it once, you kind of, it is what it is. You can clearly see he was trying to just kind of reclaim the song as his own after all the He's So Fine nonsense. But anyway, there was one song on there that is, oddly enough, not on the any version that I've seen of the new remix, other than in its original demo form, which was with Ringo and Klaus. But it was just like a one-take thing. It was, again, it's demo form. It wasn't as fully formed. It's the song I Live For You, which was originally unreleased, but they clearly had gone beyond just to take one thing. They workshopped it, they worked it. There was a beautiful pedal steel guitar on there by Pete Drake. And I mean, it was clearly fleshed out in 2000, you know, by Donnie Harrison and George Harrison to make it a little more sort of, you know. In my head, I was like, you know, I'd like to hear that. I'd like to hear that as part of this package. So I plopped it there. I did the same thing. I added that little bit of high stuff that I did, and it worked really well. You know, it clearly wasn't fully fleshed out. I mean, they didn't, you know, it could have used strings. It wasn't as, you know, but that being said, it sounds like it fits right into me. It's the same players, same people, same kind of vibe of the song, you know. So just a thought, in my mix of it, I've added that song I Live For You from the 2001 Remaster album, and I put it right at the end of Run of the Mill. So basically it would have been at the end of record one. And we pause here, where you would go, pull the record off, and put the other record on. And then we get into Beware of Darkness, which is another one that, you know, I didn't mind the mix. Same thing. I kind of said this mix suffers less from the dreaded wall. You know, again, because it's that slow ballady kind of thing. The lead vocal on this would always, in that original mix, always seemed like particularly buried for some reason, and the same thing with the slide guitars. They were just not distinct enough for me. What I used to think were always strings are clearly it's synthesizer. And you know, Danny actually mentions this in the book from the LP set about it, that like when he put the tracks on and he realized, oh wait, that's the Moog synthesizer. That's not regular strings. Now he can't hear it any other way. And sure enough, I go back to the AB of the original, and you can clearly hear it. Oh, that's a synth, right? Yeah. So interesting, right? Yeah, it's just as much as you heard the Moog synth on the Apple Jam album, which I believe is I Remember Jeep. I want to say, I always forget which one it is because, let's face it, I don't really listen to the Apple Jam record much. Anyway, so onto the remix of that though. Same thing. It's pretty deverbed. I say deverbed, fairly completely. Tambourine's in a much better place with the shaker and the arrangement. The slide guitars are more up front. And like in adding that EQ that I added, you can hear the vibes in the horn section really kind of, and the guitars, they all kind of have this lovely shimmer, as they should, but nothing, again, it's not overdone. It's just there, and it just makes so much more sense to the song, to me, in my mind. Again, if they had added a little more reverb to it, it wouldn't have hurt it. But that being said, minor quibble. Apple Scruffs, it's always been a bit of a fluffy song, charming, heartfelt, really not much to do on that song. It's that's basically George and a guitar. The remix really isn't much different. Even adding the high end that I added, it didn't really change much, again, because it wasn't fighting with an extended sort of bass frequency, or a lifted bass frequency, whatever. So that's Apple Scruffs is what it is. Then the Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp, right? So this is another one where I think on the original mix the reverb worked to its advantage, right? Though again, the drums were always just too up front for me. And then the chanting vocals, oh, Sir Frankie Crisp, and it sounds like this really, in the original version of it, I guess it just, to me, all I could hear was reverb. I don't remember ever hearing that chant in my head. I just don't. I don't know why. The remix, just there's better clarity. The drums are correct now in the mix. The pedal steel just shines really beautifully in this piece. And again, now you hear those chants are a little bit more clear, and they're definitely sort of charmingly sinister now. It's like they're clearly meant to be comical, but they're a little sinister as well. So, that's Harrison's kind of dark humor at work right there. And I think the fact that they were buried in the original mix, to me, it's like it completely negated what he's trying to do there. He's clearly trying to just be, well, kind of Dark George, right? Anyway, so I really love the new version of the Sir Frankie Crisp. And then Awaiting on You All, same thing, stupid amounts of verb, a big fat mess. And I wrote this, it makes me not care about the Lord's Word, to be honest. That mix was just so fucking awful on the original record. I'm sorry, but it just is. I mean, again, there's a difference between listening to it in a nostalgic haze of like, yes, I loved this album, blah, 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 blah. I get that part. Believe me, I have plenty of records that I do the same thing with that technically sound like fucking shit. However, just the worst mix of this. And it's like, again, considering what he's talking about at that time of his life, it just seems odd to me why they would do that, Now the remix is like, now I can hear, the reverb on the slide guitar is still kind of a lot, but once again, it was probably printed on the track, so there's not much they could do. But there's still a lot more clarity, especially with the horns. I feel like I can hear Harrison's vocal better. I mean, again, more apt to listen to what he's actually singing, to the words. Look, I don't have this clattering sound in my head that I'm trying to, what is this? What did he say? It's like, what is he trying to say? Not one of my favorites on the record, but again, I think there was a reason for that. I like it a lot better now. And so we're on to the namesake of the record now, All Things Must Pass. Now, this, on the original record, is probably the best mix on the record. It almost seems like that way, too, from the very first song on the record to going into the later, that they got better and better and better, oddly. Again, we're talking about the original mix. The original mix of this on the album is actually pretty kind of perfect, really. But it also felt to me it's like it maybe it really felt like Phil Spector's thumbs weren't all over this particular one. You know, that he was out of the picture by that point because he'd broken his arm or some such in the studio because he's being Phil Spector or whatever, and then he went away, and then they kept working, and apparently he went back and forth a little bit, but it feels like there's clearly not his influences on it, but he's not there. This is the way it should be. But with the remix, again, there's just more clarity. But must admit, I miss a little bit of the reverb on especially like on the backing vocals of the new remix. So, I mean, I toyed with the idea of putting in my mix, my set list, of putting this original mix there. But the sound of the remaster from 2001 to the new remix is drastic enough to be sort of like jarring. So it's like, that's fine. I know where to go to listen to it if I want to hear the original mix. So again, the new remix is fine, this is one of those places where I think the original mix is actually betters it for sure. I Dig Love, another one of the weirder songs on the record. The drums with the multiple echo repeating as an effect always worked well because it was just it's another sort of fluffy song that doesn't really, it doesn't further things much. It's just kind of a fun, weird song. The remix is a better sounding mix. It feels like the keyboards, which is like the Rhodes and the piano and the organ, drive it better. Drive it more than the affected drums do. In other words, the drums are a little more, in their place. So I like kind of hearing that the keyboards are actually more of the thrust than the drums on this particular one. The one thing on this particular song, because there's so much space, and there's a bit of a noise floor issue with some hiss. So when I added my EQ, there's a little bit of, especially at the very front where it's just those weird chromatic guitar licks. You hear a little bit of that kind of hiss on it. I could go back in there and tweak it. I mean, again, I might still do. Once everything starts coming into the song, it goes away. And then it sounds fine. So it was again, minor thing. I didn't take a long time doing this EQ. I'm telling you, I found something that worked pretty quickly, and then realized it worked pretty quickly on just about everything. So next up is Art of Dying. Again, the original mix is just stupid amounts of reverb, which is such a shame because, again, this is probably the most Beatle-y of all the records, or all the songs, I should say. Also finding out that Art of Dying was from 1966, same era as Isn't It a Pity, which is interesting. So I can see how in 1966 a song with the title Art of Dying would be a little sort of scary for the folks, for the Beatle folks, and for the folks making the money. Yep. But it's definitely, it feels like, I could hear, the other folks, I could hear the Beatles doing this in that era. The remix, again, same thing, more clarity. I think on this one more than anything, that it kind of, the remix creates a little bit of justice to the horn arrangements and the horn players. The horn arrangement on this song in particular is really, really awesome. It's really hot, and they're playing it so well, and just like, and that's the thing that I felt was always missed from the original remix, right? In general, you hear the other players on this record. You hear everybody playing. You hear what they're doing. You hear, Billy Preston's piano. You hear Gary Brooker's organ or whatever it might be, and you hear it, and you hear what they're doing. Instead of it just being this mess, and that was the whole point of why he wanted those folks to play on his record in the first place, because he knew they were great players. And the original mix on so many of those songs just sort of like, okay, I kind of don't care. I don't know what I can't hear what they're playing. I've reiterated that enough, I suppose. Yeah. So, Isn't It a Pity version 2. This is probably it also sounds very Beatle-y. This is probably the most psychedelic on the record, if you really listen to the backing vocals on this version of it, you have to wonder if George was purposely almost mimicking John and Paul in the backgrounds, especially the high ahs that sound very much like from the ahs from Because in Abbey Road, right? It sounds like that's them singing, you know. I like to think in my head that it is. You know, and again, it's another weird version of the song, but I gotta wonder though if the inclusion. There's a story in here that originally he did one version, didn't like it, did the second version, thought it was better, but then went back and liked the first version as well. The thing that came to my mind was that this is beyond the remix now. Is that like perhaps it was the inclusion of both of them was sort of like a subconscious idea or a point that you know, humans inevitably do not learn and repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. You know what I mean? So it's always a pity. Isn't it a pity? Isn't it a shame? How we take each other's love and cause each other pain over and over and over again. That's kind of what I took from this. And it's funny, like, again, I think it's amazing how the remix has made me rethink how I think of the album and what he potentially was thinking. I don't know. It's all supposition, it's all theory, but it's just what I'm hearing. But that's what I hear now. When I hear, you know, I hear that like it's just a reiteration of like this sort of very world-weary sort of, again, isn't it a pity? You know, we're going to do this again and again and again, folks. And guess what? That's what humans do. If anything, that's probably the best thing that humans do, is make mistakes over and over and over again and don't learn from them. Hey, listen, I'm right there. Clearly, I'm definitely one of those folks. I have made mistakes over and over and over again. Knowing better, sometimes not knowing at all. I don't know. That was what anyway, long story short, that's where I kind of went with this one after hearing this remix. You can definitely hear that in the new remix of this is that the especially toward the end where it kind of builds up a bit, you can kind of hear the Moog synthesizer come up, burbling up a little more in the foreground, and it, again, sounds a little more psychedelic, this particular treatment of the song on the record. And then, so, you know, the record proper ends with Hear Me Lord. Again, one of the original, you know, the original version of this that was just, actually, I'm sorry, I'm going back here. This was another one of the ones, it says another of the original ones that was less egregious. The mix made sense, though the lead vocals were a bit buried. The remix, the vocals and the horns shine. So, it's, the original of this, again, was sort of, it was okay. It was, you know, didn't make me hate it. Now, you know, Hear Me Lord, I mean, it clearly was a very personal thing for George to put this on there. So, you know, I don't myself really, you know, it's affecting in thinking about how it affected him. That particular thing doesn't necessarily affect my sensibilities or my heart, for that matter. Just the nomenclature of it, the wording of it. That's just me. However, I can cry at the poetry of a dragonfly hovering mid-flight while, you know, but from behind that locked door can make me weep like a child. So, you know, it all depends on what you know, what you curry, I suppose. Now, going on from there, obviously we're on to the third album, which is the Apple Jam album. And that was just a remaster from like the nth remaster of that. I'm sure like the idea of just having to remix that just sort of didn't make sense. And maybe they weren't able to. I mean, again, those sound like, it's like, okay, let's have the band jam so we can get sounds. And, you know, so it doesn't sound like they were recording the multi-track at that point. But I did the same thing, you know, I added the EQ, and sure enough, it sounded fine to do such. You know, obviously you have It's Johnny's Birthday. I did use the order of things where I guess Harrison originally always wanted to have Out of the Blue end the record, and for whatever reason, probably because of pressing issues of the day, came right after It's Johnny's Birthday, and he didn't want to do it that way. So I restored the original running order that he wanted for that. And, you know, that's my critique. Again, I'm not critiquing the demos or the outtakes or the jams that were on the 8 LP set. the extras. Those sound, as good as they're going to sound because they're all remixed. I probably could go in there and maybe add some EQ things or whatever. But again, it's one of those albums. That's the part of the package that's sort of, it's great and everything, but it wasn't what I was buying it for. I was buying it for the remix. So hence I'm just not going to go to that on this particular critique video. However, it does sound really great. I'm hearing the demos with Harrison, Ringo, and Klaus on the first. Basically, it was the first day of doing demos for Phil Spector, playing that stuff live, and just kind of hearing things being workshopped, or and hearing the three of them as a band, and it's like it's about as Beatley as you're gonna get, really. I mean, it's you got Ringo and George, you got half of them there. Klaus, clearly not the bass player Macca is, but at one point he was going to potentially take his place. There was talk about, Macca's out, let's bring in Klaus, and Klaus was all over John Lennon's records as well, with Ringo and George, for that matter. So, there you go. But, again, that's an aside. So, long story short, again, I'm going to reiterate. They nailed the remix. They failed the master. And I don't want this to be a situation where it becomes something that, like, some videos got taken down for people for slagging off the new remix because they were just really slagging it off, like horrible sonics, blah 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 blah. I'm not doing that because I don't do that. I'm not just going to slag something for the most part, unless Phil Spector's involved, I guess. No, I didn't want to just kind of do the thing where it's like, I agree with everybody, it is what it is, don't buy it or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. I say do what you want to do, because plenty of people have bought it and clearly like it, as do I. My first listen to it was without that EQ, and I thought it sounded great on headphones especially. It was then when I started listening to other speakers, and then did the A/B and started realizing what people were saying. It's like, oh, they're right. There's something missing. It feels like there's something missing in the mastering of this particular project. In adding that, and again, I'm not going to put it in the notes underneath. It'll be, you have to watch this video where what my notes are for adding EQ. Again, it's EQ to my tastes, so it might not work for you. It might be too bright for you, or even still not bright enough. I don't know. For me, it works. So, long story short, I finally have an All Things Must Pass album that I want to listen to over and over again, and that I've always wanted since the first time I heard it. I finally have it. So you're talking a bucket list thing. Now, was it right out of the box that way? No, it wasn't. I have to be clear there. However, no matter what did or didn't get done, this is an album that deserves everything that it's getting 50 years later, on all the charts and all the countries. And yeah, is it going to make people money? Of course it is, because it's the music business. If that's somehow a big surprise to people at this point who buy records, where have you been all this time? It is what it is. People make money off of records like this because they're going to make records. They're going to make, or it's going to, these certain records are going to make money perpetually. When Sgt. Pepper is released for its 60th anniversary, because it's coming, I'm gonna buy it. I mean, the Beatles Let It Be box, 50th anniversary, is coming up in a couple months now, along with Peter Jackson's redo of the movie. So that's awesome, and that's always been sort of the weak. I think probably for most people, it's always been the weak spot of the band's catalog. However, so it'll be interesting to hear what they do with it. So yeah, say what you will about remixes. Some people think it's just a money grab. Maybe for some people it is. However, I don't think that way, or I don't feel that way. If listening to the remix of Sgt. Pepper from Giles from back in back in 2016 or 17 or whatever it was. No, wait, how is it that old or young or wait? I forget when that came out now. Yeah, it was 2016. And apart from one minor thing and Within You Without You, to me it's the definitive version of the record because of, again, what they did technologically to be able to really suss out what was put on tape back in 1967. All right, so I mean, that's really all I have to say about that for this one. But if this is something you would want me to do with other remixes potentially, I mean, I'm looking at box sets in front of me again. I'm looking at the Sgt. Pepper remix. I'm looking at the White Album, the Abbey Road one. I'm looking at Pink Floyd remixes. Very Gentle Giant. I mean, I'm looking at all kinds of stuff. If you are interested potentially in hearing me go on and on about some of my favorite records, either the original versions or the remixes, then go ahead and put it in the comments on below. If you got nothing nice to say, I'm going to read it, but then I'm going to erase it. So you might as well not bother. So if you don't agree with me, that's fine. I don't care. It's no big deal. It's no skin off my nose. This is my opinion. I'm not trying to shove anything down anybody's throat. You can buy it or you don't have to, but I'm just saying if you do buy it and are disappointed, here's an out-of-the-box idea to make it so that you don't feel disappointed. I've also noticed, and this is just the last thing I'm going to say, is that most of the folks that I've noticed that don't like it are those of us that are a little bit older, that like either, and I'm going to say this as a sound engineer, as someone who has had to try to take care of his hearing as best as possible, and you get older, things change. As a musician, doing live work, doing recording work, whatever, most musicians and most people that have either gone to loud concerts or whatever it is over the period of their younger lives lose that high mid to high range sonic capability in their ears, right? What I find interesting is that the EQ that I added to the new remix are exactly the frequencies that we're all missing. I gotta wonder if that's not an accident somehow. And the thing of it is that some of us that are older that are listening to this thing, we're already reticent of that. Like our hearing is already that part of it's already low. So the fact that this came in and it was just that much lower, so all we're hearing is bass, mid range, and that's it. We're not hearing any high end sparkle. Just something to consider. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm not calling people deaf. Those of us that are older that listened to loud music for a long, long time when they were younger, listen, you know what I'm talking about. This is what it is. You know it's a fact. Don't fight me on it. Anyway, I just find it funny. So that's it. That's it for this. Again, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed it or not. And hopefully I'll do some more of these because I'd like to be able to do more of these. I will talk to you soon, hopefully. Let me know if there's any specific albums you might be interested in me talking about. I can't talk. I've been talking for almost 2 hours now, so I'm getting tired. Anyway, I will see you soon. Hopefully, take care.